tanks. So let's go to the tank category. So basically, I'm going to pop out 4 videos kind of quickly about each class for Paladins this year. I did take a little bit of a break from Paladins this year, but I did come back very strong to end the year, get back. So with some of the changes coming up to all the categories, I wanted to kind of give a little bit of a synopsis, if you will, of each of the 4 categories in the game, just to explain where each of the characters kind of sat at the beginning of the year, where they sit at the end of the year, going into next season, just to give you guys an idea of like some thoughts. I will be saving the 4 newest characters, which are Rom, Atlas, Io, and Amani. I will be saving them for the last in each category. I just started to start with tank because, well, I'm a tank main. So, yeah. So, kicking off the list, we're going to be starting with Ashe. Ashe started the year in a relatively strong position. There weren't a lot of big nerfs to her. There were a few. Mostly, I think the biggest one was the nerf to her health.
Ashe.
They cut her health from 4,900 HP to 4,500 HP. That's pretty much the biggest nerf she received. She didn't really get that many buffs. Ashe's predominant playstyle is around being kind of a bully tank. She's often looked at as being mid-tier. Most people don't think she can solo tank. Most people think she's an aggro tank. She can solo tank.
Ashe.
The downside to Ashe is she really only has 2 viable talents between Battering Ram and Fortress Breaker. Where with Fortress Breaker, what you're going to do is you pop a giant shield. It gives you a bit more sustain, but it doesn't. You're countered out by Wrecker, and then Battering Ram, where your damage reduction is tremendously increased while using your shoulder bash. All I really want to talk about with Ashe too much is that heading into next season, her base damage is going down. They're also nerfing the health of her shield a little bit, obviously, because they're nerfing all the shield healths. And they're nerfing her shoulder bash. They're trying to make her a little bit less unkillable. One thought I want to say is, for whatever reason, Ashe just is a character no one seems to pick Cauterize with, even though she is the best tank in the game for Cauterize. Like, hands down. So, to be honest, I think as of June, there was really this big thing of just Ashe as not buying Cauterize, where whatever games I would say, they just would not buy Cauterize. And you can't convince Ashe players nowadays to buy Cauterize, and it's insane. Even though she's the best tank in the game, because she's the only tank other than Terminus and Fernando, who are short-range only characters, to apply area damage. So, looking at Barik, Barik started the year at a relatively weak position. Most people did not think he was that strong of a tank. If you were a longtime Barik player, you knew he was a relatively strong tank. Then he got some buffs. I think it was right after the patch where Atlas released. I think it was the patch after Atlas released. Barik got a lot stronger. They took a lot of his loadout cards and nerfed them, mostly to Rocket Boots and Barricade. They reduced those cooldowns by default. They increased his damage by reducing the damage fall off. They increased the range before damage fall off. They made the spread tighter. They gave him some good quality of life changes. They changed some cards around. And Barik, by the end of the year, developed into one of the strongest main tanks in the game. Really, your 2 main tank choices right now are Inara and Barik. And going into the end of the year, pretty much the way it works is you have one team that runs Inara or Barik, and you have the other team that runs a 2-tank lineup. And that's pretty much how it is going into ranked for most of the games that I play. It's some combination of Barik, Inara, and then it's just nobody. Sometimes you'll see an Inara or Barik with a second tank going up against 2 tanks, and that team generally wins. But Barik just has so much sustain nowadays that he really is one of the strongest tanks in the game, all because they did a couple of tweaks, and now people played him a lot more and saw how strong he was despite having the low HP. Changes to come, they are going to be nerfing the shield health, the ult health, obviously. They are making a significant nerf to tinkering for most people, which I don't really play around that. And they're going to be subtly buffing Aerotonix because they're making a lot of loadout card changes with him. That's going to give him the ability to reduce cooldowns further and give him new ways to heal off of his turrets. So Barrack going into next year looks very strong. He looks very promising. He could be playing dramatically different for how most people like to play around tinkering. The people who like to play around tinkering are going to have to find a new thing. I still have always run Fortify. I really, when they improved his damage spread and his fall off, you really never needed to run tinkering, in my opinion. I'm able to confirm 820 headshots at a decent range, so I don't really need the tinkering bonus. But Barrack's in a strong state. Nendo. Nendo was in a pretty weak spot. They had nerfed Nendo down. You know, like Flank Nendo was gone. Some of the cards that Nendo had really felt more of a meme than anything else, but they ended up gradually buffing him back. Nendo's in a relatively healthy spot right now. He's in a spot where he can kind of bounce between being a main tank and an off tank, similar to how Ashe is. Most higher level people regard Nendo as strictly an off tank, however. He's designed to be an aggro, push up in your face and bully you. Then the buff to Aegis came, where they nerfed the cooldown to his shield by default, and they gave him a cooldown card for his shield. So they took away extra health on the shield. So instead of having this massively tanky shield that forced the enemy to buy Wrecker, they decided to make it so you could have a slightly smaller health shield that you could have up a lot more often. And that kind of offset Wrecker a bit, and it made Aegis a bit more viable. The 2-second cooldown reduction that's listed on Aegis does not apply for whatever reason right now, but he's always played as kind of this midline where he needed help with loadout cards to be aggressive. Heading into the next year, they are nerfing the shield health, obviously. They're also going to be increasing some of his fireball. So they're going to be changing a lot of his fireball cards. They're going to be increasing the cooldown on it. They are bringing Flank Nendo back to compensate, like the highly aggressive, I hit a fireball and I'm in your face with movement speed Nendo. Yeah, that's making a comeback. But I think Nendo's in a pretty comfortable state. I think Nendo has the tools to be aggressive and the tools to be defensive. It just depends on how you're playing him and the team comp that you have around you. I say, unlike Ashe, I think he has better sustain options than Ashe does. But I think what Ashe has over him is Ashe is able to handle more people at a time than Nendo is. Inara really hasn't been changed all year. She's had a few tweaks, but that's it. Inara is still the strongest main tank in the game between her combination of her damage reduction and her increased healing. It makes her a really strong point tank. She does solid damage, and her strength lies in her ability. Why am I on this weapon? Why am I not on my golden weapon? How dare the game take off my golden weapon? How dare you, game? She really relies around playing around a couple of different playstyles. Right now, she only has two viable playstyles, and that's the Cripple and the Mother's Grace for the DR, which Mother's Grace is going to be the predominant one. The only thing they're really doing to her this patch is they're reworking her wall. They're reworking Tremors, they're reducing the health of the wall, and they're making it so that she's a lot stronger to play around Tremors, so it's not just kind of like this meme pick. But Inara really hasn't changed. She's the premier main tank in the game if you want a sit-on-point tank, along with Barrack. Khan, again, really didn't get changed. The only thing they really messed with too much on him was his ult. They messed with his ult. They made it a bit harder to activate. So instead of it being a lock-on where you just press it and the cursor, when the cursor's over the target's head, and it'll automatically pull them to you, now it's a skill shot. So you have to aim it, you have to hold it, you have to hit it, and then it'll come to them. And it's possible to miss it. Although you do get a bit of a refund like a Xin or a Drogo's ult, where if you miss, you get some of it back, but other than that, he hasn't changed. He's one of the top DPS tanks in the game. He's capable of main tanking, he's capable of off tanking, he's one of the premium off tanks, he's a great DPS character. He can be a solid main tank if you know how to play around him. Coming up, they're going to be obviously nerfing the health of his shield. They are nerfing Storm of Bullet, so it's not giving you that extra 10 ammo anymore. So you're going to have to run a loadout card for the extra ammo. Trying to nerf his DPS a little bit because of how just insanely strong of a DPS he is. Like, if you lose Victor Tyrant to the enemy team, you can pick up COD and you pretty much have the same thing. So, other than that, I think he's in a really strong spot in the game. I don't think they're doing too much to him. They are buffing him a little bit statistically. They're doing some stat tweaks to him, even though they are nerfing his shield health. There's going to be ways to get some of that back. You know, they're making some cooldown changes to his heal. I think he's going to be a relatively strong spot. Makoa. Poor Makoa. Because of PCs, pretty much always getting nerfed into the ground. But Koa, I don't think Koa really changed that much over the year. Koa's still been one of the strongest tanks in the game. What Makoa is having done to him is they're dramatically increasing the cooldown of his hook, and they're lowering his DPS by a lot. But they're giving a bit more damage to Pluck to offset it, and they're giving him an extra round to his magazine, going from 4 to 5. So they're doing what I call the Buck treatment, where they give him that extra ammo, and they're giving him a way to keep his old damage, just not as often. They're nerfing the health of his shield, obviously, and they're making Leviathan base kit, pretty much, where you run Leviathan, not really for the extra 600 health, but you run it for the cooldown reduction when your ult is up. They are giving him that into his base kit. So, you're going to have a CC immune Makoa in his ult now. Hasn't really changed. It's as long as you can hit your hooks, you're pretty much good with him. But he does come down to positioning. I think a lot of people this year, this is a big thing to me, this year compared to last year, people said Makoa can't solo tank this year. Like, they view Makoa strictly as like this off tank, and when there's people like me who, well, I view him as a main tank, it makes it very difficult because we've had people that just straight up throw games. Because they're like, oh, I'm solo tanking as Makoa, this game is lost, even though, like, it's entirely possible. He's a strong main tank. But going into next year, I don't know how. I think a lot of tanks are going to be capable of solo tanking. Looking at Ruckus. Ruckus came into the year as a DPS tank. He came in as the off tank. He's one of the best off tanks in the game. You put him with another tank like a Barrack, a Nara, you can even put him with someone like a Nando and an Ashe. He does really well. Coming into this next season, however, he's going to have the potential to be a solo tank, potentially. For the first time in a long time, Ruckus may be a solo tank again. But, pretty much they're making it so that Rocket Barrage, which gives him the 3 charges, that's coming by default. And what Rocket Barrage is going to do now is increase the AoE of his rockets. They're nerfing Flux Gen a little bit, and they're nerfing his shield a little bit. But because the nerf to Wrecker is coming, it's going to mean his shield lasts a little bit longer anyways. They did nerf the damage of his miniguns by like 5, and to be fair, I'll get to Rom in a minute. They're giving Rom the same treatment this upcoming patch. But, no big deal. Pretty much Ruckus' problem right now is he just doesn't have the survivability to play as a point tank. He really struggles if he has to solo tank. He can play point if you have another tank that's pushing up and being aggressive, but generally that should be Ruckus' job. he has to rely on mobility more than his tankiness, and he can't really do that if he has to run Rocket Barrage just to deal damage, so. Term! Oh god, Term. What a rough time it is to be a Terminus player. Terminus went from being incredibly strong because at the start of the year, you know, his Siphon had no cooldown to it. It didn't have a minimum requirement to stay up. His axe swung a lot faster. He pretty much... How do I feel about Term? Term was a very slow, tanky character. You had to choose between Nimble and Morale Boost for him, which was always the big issue. Then they opened up the item shop and you could pick both. Because Morale Boost was better for your tankiness and Nimble was better for your flankiness. But then they just started gradually taking away his ability to tank. And I haven't really focused on cards a lot, but Term I really have to. They've killed him in the card department. Like, if you look at a lot of his cards, most of his cards are focused around Calamity Blast and his Siphon now. They reworked a lot of his cards this year into Calamity Blast, Power Siphon, regen cards. And it really sucks. Because I feel Calamity Blast Term is probably the weakest way to play him. I don't like that. I'm gonna burn you down with this giant chunk of Calamity Blast. I don't like that style of play for him. I like him as a bully. I like him with the DR and the movement speed, getting up in your face, saying, I'm going to outrun you and out-damage you. And they kind of like, they're nerfing this playstyle. A lot of his cards are getting overhauled. Most of them are what you play if you want to be a tank Terminus. Going into next year, I think he's in a really bad state. Like, if I'm being honest, people say right now that, like, Ruckus and Torvald are the two weakest tanks. I'm going to tell you that going into next season, I'm going to say that Term and Ash are probably the two weakest tanks. Torvald. Torvald right now is in a bad spot. Torvald is in the off-tank category. He has just been hammered this year. Obviously, he's countered by Wrecker and Resilience. And they have nerfed his cards so much by nerfing Field Study. And just overall, he doesn't have a... He feels more like a support, where you're supporting a two... Like, if you run a 2-support, 2-tank type lineup, you know, if you have a damaged Grok and you're afraid the enemy team's just going to load up on Caught on you immediately, so you bring a Torvald and you say, hey, now y'all got to buy Wrecker too. That's pretty much like the team comp that Tor fits. He's incredibly hard to solo tank. He takes a lot of skill to solo tank. Those of us that can actually solo on Torvald, we're a dying breed. Going into next year, I don't see that changing. I think Torvald might be the only tank in the game that still just can't solo tank. Just because he does not have the defensive capabilities. Like, yeah, he can put shields on other people, but he just has the shield he puts on himself. And the cooldown on that is still going to be insanely strong. So, I think it's going down to 14 seconds if I remember correctly, but still. Torv is still a surprisingly good pick. You have to know that he is an off-tank like Ruckus. But what he does is he forces the enemy team onto Wrecker. So if you're running a deployable heavy team, you can kind of run Torvald to offset that. Again, a healing heavy team, you can run Torvald to offset that. That works pretty well. For the two tanks that I haven't covered, Atlas came onto the scene and immediately was a top tank because he had the highest damage in the tank category. 900 damage a shot. It does take 2.5 seconds. It says a second and a half, but there was a 1 second delay between shots. So, it really meant Atlas came onto the scene. If you can control his primary fire, he was the top tank in the game. And his shield is the best shield on the game because it just outright destroys things instead of, well, I'll buy Wrecker and take down his shield and eventually it won't be a problem. No. Atlas nullifies whatever comes into contact with it. So it's like, yeah, no. Oh, I'm just gonna throw a Sky Ult and you pop your shield up as she's throwing it and you say, bye-bye. No Sky Ult for you. So, the only thing I really would say about Atlas is one of the highest skill I think he is actually, in my opinion, the highest skill ceiling out of the tank category. Even more so than Makoa with his hooks. Because, first off, you have to know how to control his primary fire. You have to know when to use his ult. Because his ult can save who you're ulting. Whoever you banished could end up being saved by when you're doing it. Same thing with rewinding. Sometimes you can rewind somebody and it ends up saving them. One downside to Atlas is that his cards are pretty much all the same. Most Atlases are going to run the same, similar builds from what I see. I don't think he's really in a good position for that. But heading into next year, he is getting nerfed again. They have been trying to nerf him down because he is a top tier tank. And pretty much they're just nerfing his damage. Other than that, Atlas is pretty strong as long as you know how to play him. He's in the odd spot where if you look right now, it feels like Inara and Barik are the only two main tanks, according to most people, and that you can't play anyone else. I disagree. I think that Rom, Ruckus, and Torv are the only ones that can't main tank. I think everybody else can main tank. I think Ruckus, Rom, and Torvald is an uphill battle. And then the newest champion that came out, Rom, the Bullet Sponge. He came out and he was really weak in my opinion when he came out. Playing around him a bit more, I still think he's weak. He's very much like Ruckus. He's a very strong DPS tank. But in my opinion, the downside to him is his strength. His strength is I have a very high health pool. I can withstand a beating. It's also his downside because when you get focus fire, you have no counterplay to it. Really, he doesn't. The only nerf that they're really doing, they're nerfing one of his DR cards in his loadout because everybody pretty much spams it. I really don't. There's a better playstyle to him, but other people just don't understand that playstyle. They're like, oh, there's a shit card, even though it's better than the DR style. But I'm not gonna say that. You'll have to wait for something very special coming up. Probably next week. If they drop the season update next week, you'll see. Other than that, they're also nerfing his damage down to match Ruckus. I think that's fair. Other than that, Rom is pretty strong. I think the big thing with Rom is that people choose the wrong card. You want to run Earth Splitter. You want to run the ult charge so that you have your ult up more often. And I don't think a lot of people really run that. That's the downside. Turning his ult into basically an extra ability, like a Tyra Firebomb, without the cooldown reduction. Yeah, he's really strong. All in all, this was the year of the tank. One thing for me, tank, there's this little circle of life in Paladins where damages counter tanks, tanks counter flanks, flanks counter damages, damages counter tanks, tanks counter flanks. This little ongoing circle of characters countering characters. And because tanks were just so prevalent this year in being the meta picks, even though no one wants to play tanks, tanks were the meta this year. They were so strong. Because of how prevalent tanks were, certain damages became a lot stronger, and flanks were non-existent. So with a lot of the tank nerfs coming, we'll have to wait and see how they come out. But, thanks for watching. We'll have the next one coming right up.